Our next speaker is Stephanie Perry. She is the Vice President of Commercial Transactions for 8 Minute Energy, a nationwide company whose singular focus is on utility-scale solar power and energy storage. She heads up the procurement function for 8 Minute, and over the course of her renewables career, has closed over 3 gigawatts of EPC, O&M, and equipment contracts. With her experience in PV project development, she has recently taken on the additional role of leading the engineering functions there. Stephanie manages large power purchase agreements, including the 400 megawatt photovoltaic solar plus 1.2 gigawatt energy storage Elon Center, a project of the LA Department of Water and Power. Stephanie holds engineering degrees from Notre Dame and USC, as well as an MBA from UC Berkeley. Prior to business school, she was a launch and operations systems engineer for space satellites. Where are her photos? And as you can see from the photos, Stephanie enjoys the great outdoors when she's not structuring and managing power agreements, and she tries desperately to keep up with her daughters at their favorite playgrounds. Tonight, Stephanie will discuss an important and very contemporary issue, the current state of tariffs on solar development.
All right, thank you for the introduction. In my role, I've had a front row seat to how the solar industry has been impacted by tariffs. So through this presentation, I want to walk you through the history of solar tariffs and what the results of those were on the industry. So first, let's take a look back. In the early 2000s, the United States was one of the major PV module producers, accounting for a quarter of all global PV module production. Fast forward to 2012, and China entered the field and became by far the biggest player. During this same amount of time, the US barely moved the needle in terms of PV module production due to inability to compete on cost. Certain US manufacturers believed this was due to dubious practices by Chinese businesses and the government. So what followed was an investigation into these practices in order to level the playing field for domestic US manufacturing. So in 2012, the first tariffs were imposed. The US Department of Commerce put in place anti-dumping and countervailing duties on modules made with Chinese cells to counteract those business practices I referred to. The Chinese suppliers then started producing their panels with cells from Taiwan. So in 2014, further tariffs were put in place on modules from with cells from Taiwan and Chinese modules, period. That led to a mass migration of panel production to Southeast Asia to address the US market. In 2018, apart from modules, we also have been impacted by tariffs on global steel and aluminum, which make up piles, trackers, and aluminum frames that are in our solar plants. And over the last 2 years, there's also been broad tariffs on all exports from China. Again, many products that make up a solar plant are made in China, including transformers, trackers, inverters, and many others. So what were the results of all these tariffs? First, production moves to meet US demand. So we saw this as module manufacturing moved from China to Taiwan and then to Southeast Asia. To further encourage production in the United States, the Section 201 tariffs came into play in 2018 on all modules made outside the US with some limited exceptions. These are in place for 4 years. So you're probably wondering, did those Section 201 tariffs increase US module production? We have seen a limited uptick in production here in the US, but by and large, over the last 2 years, US demand still outweighs the domestic production. Result number 2, we see higher costs passed to the end consumer. So tariffs increase system costs, PV developers have to increase their PPA prices, and utilities pass that on to their end consumers. Result number 3, we often see retaliation in tariffs. So in 2012, while the module production in the US was suffering, in fact, US polysilicon was doing quite well, and China was one of the major importers of US polysilicon. You can see that on the blue line of this chart. But around 2012, when the AD/CVD tariffs were put in place, China retaliated and started to drastically cut back their importation of US polysilicon. Result number 4 is uncertainty coming from tariffs. All these tariffs make business planning really uncertain and difficult. Tariffs seem to be coming and going, and often without warning. So what's next? We are concerned there could be more tariffs. Again, it is uncertain, but there has been talk about Vietnam taking advantage of the US worse than China. There were threats against Mexico over the summer. But despite all this, the PV module average sale price over the last decade has dropped tremendously net of these tariffs. And this is in large part due to innovation in PV module technology, engineering, and manufacturing. Additionally, the industry at large has grown tremendously, and this is in large part due to federal, state, and corporate policies driving renewable energy. So in conclusion, while these tariffs have made procurement never a boring job, the industry continues to overcome the challenges and is expected to thrive into the foreseeable future as innovation and demand outweigh the negative impacts of these tariffs. Thank you.